Welcome. My name is Opubo Benebo. Admittedly, the dimensions of a subsistence farm has been suggested to be 9 feet by 7 feet without regards to the cardinal directional orientation of the farm, which may or may not in general necessarily have an east-west orientation that aligns with the path of the sun sweeping across the sky. That means the crop plants will continually twist and orient daily in reflection of the guided tropism with the sun position as the sun sweeps across the sky. The reactions to the effect of the tropisms will most certainly bring the crops plants into regular contact with each other, predicating potential consequences which could include infections that would adversely impact high productivity as a result of the losses due to infections, and also bring about wholesome exchange of pollination particles that cause cross-pollination. This circumstance particularly characterizes urban farms and farms located within garages and basements as well, and therefore affects the productivity as already suggested. These farm spaces usually have openings to the sun through windows and broken walls and what have you. So for these farms, the sunlight shines onto the farms through these windows and broken walls of buildings being used for urban farms. For this to happen necessarily to keep every plant in its own space and restrict phototropism and prevent heliotropism, so there is minimal interaction between the same plants, but most importantly between different crop plants. In synopsis then, this episode, entitled Restricting Tropisms to Prevent Infections, offers the didactic guide to restricting the plants from suffering tropisms that force the bending of the plants in alignment with the path of the sun across the sky. The technology that has the potential capacity for effecting the restrictions and general implementation of the process automation control for the technology, assuring the restricting of the tropisms. The driver rationale guiding the restricting of the crop plant from suffering stem bending tropisms has the aim of defining distinct space for each crop plant and prevent orientation deformations of the stem such that the plants do not come into direct contact with each other that adversely affects high productivity, which of course is contrary to an aspiration of operating a subsistence farm to realize harvest of high productivity for a short feed, but also with the goal to plant and harvest helpful crops, and helpful must include preventing cross-pollination, interactive diseases, and such that we do not only feed but also remain healthy from the food. A necessary approach then is implement a mechanism that has the sunlight shining over the plant, cause the invariant tropism, phototropism, which being very active forces the plant to remain upright because of the phototropism orients it upward towards general locale, in the case directly above, from where the more intense sunlight shines and overwhelms only any tendency for heliotropism because of the light intensity of the radiation from the mechanism is by design more intense and consequentially overpowers the effect of the external variation of the light coming directly from the sun due to the path of the sun across the sky. The effect of the heliotropism should be even more acute with the plants in the garages and basements, subsistence farms, because these farms will have sunlight streaming into the spaces through windows, and thus, as a result of which the entire farm will not be able to enjoy the incidence beam of the sunlight. Admittedly, the incidence of sunlight on the entire farm can be improved for the garage subsistence farm by cutting off the roof and letting a large transparent overhead polygonal space through which the sunlight streams into the space and onto the farm plants. However, even that would not be enough to ensure direct overhead shining of the sun at an intensity relatively higher than the ambient sunlight. So, the same mechanism would still need to be installed for that object to obtain. The situation is even worse for the indoors basement subsistence farms because the option of overhead cutaway is not available for this category of farms. The opening through which sunlight may stream in are the small window apertures, if any, usually provided for basements. So then, a concerted effort must be made to install the mechanism that would otherwise ensure the direct overhead irradiation of the plants with the sunlight. Accomplishing this goal requires technically to have the sun shine directly above the plant at all times of the day without regard to the intensity of the sunlight. For this to happen, the sunlight has to be captured, transmitted into the farm locale, and irradiated onto the crop plants. One well-documented technology enabling the capture, transmission, and re-emission of sunlight is the sunlight harness photoguide, and as such can be deployed in this case to make the sunlight available even in the basement farms, garage farms, outside subsistence farms. Of course, the re-emission of the sunlight has to be incidence onto a photoirradiator disperser. While the collecting and transmitting of the sunlight can be readily achieved with the said technology, the only known technology for dispersing light is shaped as a bulb, but because the ridges are unidirectional, the use of bulb does not enable uniform dispersion of the light or re-emission of the light along the ridges. Hence, a different geometry of disperser would be more appropriate, and the geometry is best if cylindrical, with a unidirectional light irradiation device also installed within for a cylindrical disperser, which gets mounted such that the cylindrical axis of the disperser is aligned with the ridge's length dimension. Implementation of the technologies on a subsistence farm, such as to laterally orient the photoradiation vertically downwards, however, requires certain retrofit engineering of the technology for ease of adoption. For this object is adopted a composite trough reflector that in essence has the form of a trough made of metal but has isosceles triangular base and then parabolic walls. At installation, the trough is of course turned upside down such that the triangular base is upward and the apex of the triangular base being the apex of the inverted trough. The cylindrical light disperser is then mounted lengthwise along the trough and at the otherwise cross-sectional parabolic focal point. Now, when the sun shines, the light will be transmitted to the disperser and then irradiated head-on onto the plants. And because these are closer and of higher intensities, the plants will preferentially suffer tropism towards the overhead irradiation as desired. Finally, for the deployment, a structure needs to be put in place for mounting the retrofit technology and hence the deployment of the technology. So for that, build a bar about 6 feet on both ends of the ridge and then a connecting crossbar. Adjust the bar, replacing light dispenser along the overhead bar. The conclusion that could be drawn at this time based on the sourcing and adoption of the technology is that there exists a technology which can be retrofit engineered to provide the functionality of tropism restrict such that the crop plants are localized into distinct spaces as to prevent direct contact interactions that have the potential for acting as source for infection and cross-pollination with adverse effects. Though also not explicitly developed in the retrofit engineered technology, the sunlight harness photoguide could be adapted to instead trace the path of the sun as the sun sweeps across the sky and in effect change orientation to give a pseudo-heliotropism dynamics and mimicry of the heliotropism of the plants such that the maximal insolation of the sunlight is collected through the day. As an alternative, yet again, following the principles of spherical geometry, several of the sunlight harness photoguide could also be packaged into the form of a spherical object, such that the insolation of the sunlight always falls on at least one of the photoguides, yet again, in mimicry of the heliotropism of the plants, but without actually letting the plants do so, while the maximal insolation of the sunlight is collected and irradiated on the plants throughout the day. And on that note, it is a wrap. And I say to you, thank you so much for having come to listen to this observation about efforts aimed at alleviating world hunger through subsistence farming by both urban dweller farmers and emerging countries' small farms farmers. You are truly appreciated. And if you would like to get privileged viewer or reader information, or access podcasts of specialized content, or even vertically integrated concepts, then I implore you to join my supporter club and enjoy that privileged status. Moreover, while you're still here, do please take a moment and subscribe to the channel as to be informed of the publication of every new episode as soon as it is released. Thank you. Bye till next episode.